Hello friends, my name is Leigh and I create videos about photography as an art and as a lifestyle. Today we are comparing photos from a medium format camera and a full frame camera. I even compared a 4/3 camera for one of the outings. The questions that we will answer today are: how different is medium format? Is it worth the price? And do I need it? Before we jump into it, I want to thank the sponsor of this portion of today's video, KEH. KEH buys and sells used camera gear. Some of the lenses that I used in the creation of this video were borrowed from KEH, but I already sent them back, so they are now available for purchase. KEH has everything under the sun that has to do with photography. Camera bodies and lenses, from vintage film SLRs to high-end digital medium format, accessories like tripods and lighting. You can even purchase gift cards. With the holidays right around the corner, maybe request a KEH gift card from your loved ones. I've used KEH to buy and to sell my own gear for many years, and I appreciate their honest and efficient process. You can find links in the description of this video to buy and to sell your gear, along with my special codes that get you a discount on the purchase of gear or a bonus on the sale of your gear. If you do go shopping, let me know what you purchase so that I can live vicariously through you. Thank you to KEH for supporting this channel. Let's talk about the gear that I used in this comparison, because gear is crucial to this examination. There are a few medium format digital offerings on the market today. In the past, I have used cameras from Hasselblad and from Fujifilm's GFX line. I will link to videos that I created when using some of those options in the description below, including the video about my time at the Grand Canyon with the Fujifilm GFX 100S2. In fact, it was in the comments of that video where some of you asked about the actual difference between full frame and medium format. I was able to borrow the GFX for a little bit of extra time, so thank you to Fujifilm. So that's what I used for this comparison between medium format and full frame. We will certainly look at side-by-side images, but the characteristics of the photos themselves are not the only difference between medium format bodies and full frame bodies. Not to mention that there are significant differences among medium format bodies and among full frame bodies. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point here is that we are going to look at this in a practical way. Photo quality, usability, cost, size, and weight, and other aspects that may be important to you. Let's start out by taking you to Dobbins Lookout near the top of South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona, where Raymond and I planned to do some evening time city lights photography. It's a wonderful place to relax on a Sunday evening and soak in both the amazing landscape and the city lights of downtown Phoenix and the surrounding areas, while also doing some long exposure photography. The cameras were the GFX 100S2 and two lenses, the 45mm f2.8 and the 110mm f2, and the Lumix S5 II with the Sigma 35mm f2 DGDN Contemporary and the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DGDN Art. A quick note here. Throughout my experiment on all of the outings, I aimed to use similar lenses. I only used prime lenses. Keep in mind that the medium format focal lengths need to be multiplied by 0.8 to find out the effective field of view relative to a 35mm camera. And I used lenses with similar maximum apertures. More on that in a minute. And the cameras were always set similarly. I did use a couple of different full frame cameras on different outings because you all have different cameras. You'll see the camera, lens, and shooting data at the bottom of the screen for every photo that I share. Here on South Mountain, cameras were on tripods and pointed towards downtown Phoenix. And for this comparison, which is the pair of photos that I want to zoom in on, they were set with the same aperture. In this case, we used f8 to obtain a deep depth of field, and we used base ISO on each camera so that we could eliminate noise in the images. Simply looking at the two photos in their entirety, they look the same. other than the slight difference in composition. I adjusted white balance a little and I brightened exposure a touch on the medium format image, but that is the only editing that I did on these. Let's talk resolution and let's zoom in. The medium format image is from a sensor with 102 megapixels. You can see how much we can zoom in and retain detail. This is miles away, and the limiting factor in clarity here has more to do with atmosphere than lens quality and resolution. It's amazing how much we can see. And moving on to the full frame image, which is from a sensor with only 24 megapixels. We can certainly zoom in less until we look at the image that I captured in the S5 II's high resolution mode, which creates a 96 megapixel image. This uses sensor shifting and compiles a series of images into one large file. We can zoom in about the same amount as the medium format image with 102 megapixels, and we can see that the two photos contain the same amount of clarity. The detail in both is impressive. Okay, did that comparison surprise you as much as it surprised Raymond and I? Upon further consideration, it does make sense. I chose high quality prime lenses on both cameras. We were using base ISO and f8, which is going to be sharp on most lenses and also creates a deep depth of field, so we aren't going to be distracted by bokeh. And we were utilizing about the same number of pixels on each camera when we use the S5 II in its sensor shifting high resolution mode. So for these landscape images, there really is no practical difference. Let's look at a few more images from this evening as I discuss other considerations. I want to re-emphasize that, yes, I was able to use the S5 II to mimic grand landscape images from medium format. This required the S5 II to take multiple images, so this 96 megapixel mode would not work if something is moving. Again, this medium format does this in a single shot, just like a normal camera that happens to have a large sensor and 100 million pixels. Another thing to note here is that I did edit these images more than I edited the city lights images that we compared. I brightened exposure in the darkened foreground. I increased contrast and brought out detail in the sky. And I didn't experience a difference in the dynamic range. We will talk about editing and dynamic range again a couple more times in this video. Okay, moving on to this outing in Flagstaff, Arizona at Buffalo Park, which is basically Flagstaff's backyard, where many people come to hike, bike, run, relax, and take pictures, as it is nestled beneath Mount Eldon and the San Francisco peaks. We hiked out one of the trails and captured some wildflowers that were in bloom. Here we used the Fujifilm GFX 100S, of course, and the Leica SL2, which is L-mount just like the Lumix S5 II. For these photos, I used f2.8 for both because I wanted to look at bokeh and at the separation between the subject and the background at the same aperture and roughly the same focal length. On these two images, I adjusted white balance and exposure only, and both images were using each camera's respective base ISO setting. You'll notice first that there is quite a bit of distance between the flowers and the background, which helps to create more blur. Zooming in on the right side, we'll look at these plants that are pretty close to our subject, and also this tree, which is further away. Starting with that tree, I zoomed in and out, back and forth between the two images before deciding that, yes, the medium format did provide a bit more blur there. But then it was zooming in on the side of the path at this flower in particular where I saw the biggest difference. In the medium format image, this flower is a blurry yellow blob. But in the full frame image, while the flower is still blurry, you can absolutely see more detail. You can even see the delineation of the dark brown center of the flower. The more blurry yellow blob is because of medium format's ability to create a shallower depth of field at a distance, which helps give medium format its distinctive look and appeal. That being said, I had to very closely examine these images to even understand that there was a difference. Some notes while we look at a few more images from this outing. Different lenses have different bokeh characteristics. Sometimes the bokeh will be more attractive, smoother, more creamy. Plus, the way the photo goes from in focus to out of focus can make a difference in the way your photo looks. Some lenses have a smooth and gradual transition, and others seem to have a more harsh transition. So again, it's not only the size of the sensor that will affect the appearance of blur. You've got aperture, focal length, your distance to the subject, distance between the subject and the background, and lens characteristics. Not to mention the question of, does it even matter? Is this difference that important to you? After we went to Buffalo Park, we drove outside of town to Upper Lake Mary for sunset, again using the GFX 100S2 and the SL2. We hiked down to the rocky shoreline and got set up by the water. Lake Mary is a nice place to photograph sunset because of the way that the colors in the sky can be reflected on the water. These photos are minimally edited, but I did mask out the sky so that I could brighten the exposure on the land and the water while keeping some of that beautiful detail in the clouds. And that was really what I was thinking about when capturing these photos. I wondered which camera would allow me to retain or even recover more detail, especially in the highlights. I found the cameras, in this situation at least, to look all but identical in terms of those highlights. I've used many cameras over many years, and dynamic range characteristics can vary wildly among cameras, no matter the sensor size or how many stops of dynamic range they claim to capture. I can say that newer cameras are absolutely better than older cameras in terms of detail retention in highlights and shadows, but it isn't simply sensor size that makes the difference. And only looking at the dynamic range measurement on a test chart isn't going to give you the full understanding of what you will experience in the field. I haven't even mentioned preference. For example, I prefer images that have a naturalistic look to them. Depending on the photo, I may not recover all of the highlights that I can. I may leave the foreground darkened, like you see here, because this is close to what I saw with my eyes. And I think it tells a better story than if I tried to bring out all of the detail everywhere. Some photographers like that HDR look, which is fine for them. The key thing to remember is that we do all have our own styles and preferences. And now on to the last outing I have to show you, astrophotography near the San Francisco Peaks, which holds the tallest peak in Arizona. We were at an area called the Watchable Wildlife Trail, northwest of Flagstaff. We used the Fujifilm GFX 100S2, the Lumix S5 II, which is one of my favorite bodies for astrophotography, and I even captured a night sky photo with my little Leica Deluxe 8, which has a 4/3 sensor. Wide field astrophotography is a challenging situation for any camera and most any photographer. You're using high ISO sensitivity, you're working in the dark, you're probably spending big money on an ultra-wide lens with the widest aperture that you can find. This was also the most challenging situation to compare because of those apertures. The lenses that are available for digital medium format bodies are somewhat limited, especially in terms of aperture. For the Fujifilm GFX system, the two best options are the 23mm f4, where we have an ultra-wide field of view, but a not so wide aperture, and the 45mm f2.8, which doesn't offer a very wide field of view, but it at least offers a wider aperture. On the Lumix S5 II, I used my Sigma 14mm f1.4 DGDN art lens, ultra-wide and a very wide aperture. It is a lens that was literally engineered for night sky photography. And this is an important thing to note. If you work deeply within a photography niche, you need to pay attention to the specifics of how a particular camera system, no matter the sensor size, will work for that genre that you love. Not only the technical aspects, but also in the usability, which we will get to in a moment. Let's compare these two photos of the Milky Way over the San Francisco Peaks on a clear late summer evening. I chose the medium format ultra-wide lens for the comparison, but I used a couple other lenses later in the night, and I'll share those photos as well. Looking at these images, the first thing I think is, wow, pretty. And I think that's important to remember. Beautiful photography can be captured with any camera. But enough about the art and romance of photography. This video is all about nitpicking subtle differences between sensor sizes on expensive cameras that you might not even be thinking about buying. So let's go ahead and zoom in and check out how the stars look. I'm not concerned about zooming in as much as possible because I never significantly zoom into my night sky images because the entire point of the photo is to see the vastness of the sky. So we will keep this reasonable. As a note, I did turn off all noise reduction on the cameras. I prefer to do noise reduction in post-processing, though for the purposes of this video, I didn't do any at all. This Fujifilm lens holds up well when zooming in. I don't see coma at the corners, which is terrific, but I do see quite a lot of noise. Because of the narrower aperture, I had to use a higher ISO sensitivity. Of course, I'm not surprised to see the S5 II image looking phenomenal. As I said before, the Sigma lens was made for this work, and the S5 II, with the varying lenses that I've used on it for astrophotography, always provides me with gorgeous photos. You might now say, but Leigh, this isn't apples to apples. The Fujifilm was set at f4 and the Lumix was set at f1.4. And I say to you, while the aperture is different, this is an apples to apples comparison in that I used the best lens available for the job. Meaning, make sure that you take a look at the lenses available for any camera that you're thinking about purchasing, because you may find that there is something that you need or want but is missing in the collection. And let me share the Leica Deluxe 8 image I captured of the same scene you saw a moment ago. This camera has a 4/3 sensor, and I captured this image at the widest field of view and aperture available. And quite frankly, I'm impressed with the result. But guess what? This was not an easy photo to capture. Astrophotography is always a challenge. You are using manual focus and focusing on a tiny speck within the frame. Some cameras have better features than others in terms of visualizing your scene in complete and utter darkness. And while the camera is one of my favorites to use every day, it doesn't have those night photography features that make astrophotography more enjoyable. But looking at more medium format and full frame images, Raymond edited these night photos, and he said the medium format photos were easier to edit than the full frame photos. Editing photos this dark is always a balance because you have bright stars, a very dark sky, and then the Milky Way is all of the in-between. And Raymond said that he had more range in the shadows in particular, more fine shades of gray to work with in the medium format images. There were fewer in the full frame S5 II, and of course even less in the Deluxe 8. So there were definitely benefits and drawbacks to using the medium format system in this case. The benefit was the dark end of the dynamic range. But the camera itself wasn't easy for me to use at night. It lacks night-specific features, such as how the S5 II's LCD screen can brighten an extra few stops so that I can compose my image and find stars on which to manually obtain focus. I have a lot of experience in night sky photography. I have been using the Fujifilm cameras extensively for weeks at this point, so I was able to compose and get focus with a little trial and error. But if focus would have been off even slightly, that dynamic range wouldn't even really matter. I would just have an out of focus image. And on that note, let's talk about usability and practicality. Of course, specifications matter. If you are a wildlife photographer and you are often capturing birds in flight, you may want a camera faster than the GFX 100S2, which can capture photos at a maximum of 7 frames per second, or even lower depending upon your settings. And there is quite a bit of blackout in the viewfinder between shots. And of course, it takes a little bit of time to actually obtain focus. That being said, I used this camera and Fujifilm's new 500mm f5.6 lens for some wildlife photography, and I absolutely loved it. Having 100 megapixels means you can zoom right on into those animals and crop your photos quite a lot. Like I mentioned with astrophotography, I really missed some of those nighttime features and a very wide aperture lens. There are other specifications and considerations that may be your must-have. Maybe it's size and weight. Looking at the bodies alone, the GFX 100S2 is heavier than the Lumix S5 II, but lighter than the Leica SL2. And lenses are all over the place in terms of size and weight. And I'm not even broaching the subject of cost. There is such a wide range of costs across the entire spectrum of cameras and lenses. But you know what? The most important thing in photography isn't the gear itself. I always talk about the enjoyment of using a camera. That always makes a difference for me. If I enjoy using a camera, I will use it more often and end up with more photos and better results. A part of that is knowing how to use that camera. The more practice, the more a camera feels like an extension of yourself, and the better you are equipped to capture your photos. Of course, understanding the fundamentals of photography is imperative. There's certainly nothing wrong with purchasing any camera and setting it to auto or program mode and having a good time. But if you are looking at medium format, I suspect that you want to dig into the settings. Understanding all of those settings and why you would adjust them will help no matter the camera. And of course, timing, light, and location. It does not matter if you have the newest, most expensive, and capable camera on the market if you don't get yourself out there. If you don't set that alarm to be up and out the door for sunrise, or if you aren't standing in the middle of nowhere in a field, freezing your butt off in the dark for those Milky Way images, you certainly aren't going to capture that bird in flight while still sitting on your couch watching TV. What I'm saying is, yes, medium format is really cool. Full frame is great. But if all you have is the camera on your phone, by all means, get out there and use it. I mean, I super duper appreciate you watching this video. I literally have thousands more for you to peruse, but don't forget that the best camera is truly the one you have in your hand. Don't get so bogged down about the gear that you don't use whatever it is that you do have. So let's circle back around. The questions that I said we would answer in this video were, how different is medium format? Is it worth the price? And do I need it? Well, it isn't as easy as saying a bigger sensor is better. Every camera, even within the same brand, is different, and we photographers have varying wants and needs, diverse styles and priorities. Medium format is slower on the spectrum of frames per second and overall responsiveness. Lens selection is limited as compared to other systems. It's larger than some other systems, but not as heavy as you might think. In short, if you have a full-frame mirrorless camera, it may have more capability, speed, and portability than the GFX and other medium format cameras. But one thing those cameras don't have is the technical quality, outright pixel count, and the allure of medium format images. And if that's your jam, no other format is going to live up to your expectation. Likewise, the concept of worth is entirely dependent on the individual. For some, medium format is worth it. For others, it's not. Depending on the brand, you are looking at similar pricing to high-end full-frame cameras, which is actually pretty amazing, by the way. I've purchased high-end full-frame cameras because they are something important to me and that I am willing to spend money on. Now that I've shot much more extensively with medium format, the question becomes, do I need it? No, I don't need it. I have a lot of cameras and lenses on my shelves already. That being said, I do really like this camera. I enjoyed using it, and I think it is a solid system for a lot of different types of photography. It is a lot of money, but there are cameras that I could sell. While I would feel like I'm selling a family member, these, they are material items, and I do see myself landing on medium format as a part of my collection. I just right now can't tell you when. I can say now, though, that it is in the plan. I do have a couple more pieces of content coming your way from my time with the Fujifilm GFX 100S2. I have some portraits to edit and share, as well as a video where we adapted full frame lenses to the medium format Fujifilm camera. Why would you do that? You'll have to just subscribe to the channel so that you see when that video goes live. In the meantime, you can see my first video with it. I will link to that in the description. Thank you again to KEH for sponsoring a portion of this video. KEH does have a wonderful collection of medium format cameras and lenses, and that collection is ever changing. I will add links in the description of this video to some specific pieces, but I will also link to all of their medium format digital gear. You can definitely save some dollars by purchasing used, especially if you use my discount code. And last, thank you for watching.